Well, folks, it has been a week. It has been a week. And if you've seen my other update about the hurricane and our situation, and of course, you've probably seen it on the news, you'll understand why. I'm not going to duplicate any of that information. Just go watch that little update. I'm just glad to be here, happy to be talking to you all again. I had a video all ready to go, just about, and all of that went on hold. So here it is today, and we've got a little bit of a surprise in terms of the type of content in this video. It was not content I expected to make, but I think you're going to enjoy it. I had a blast making it. So I'm here, Reese is here, and we're ready to go. Hello, minders. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. So what in the world, in the whole wide world, are we doing today? You're not going to believe this, but we're going to be looking at some water-soluble oil colors, otherwise known as water mixable oils. Right now, there's probably dozens of you out there going, what? A watercolor channel? I've been curious about these for quite a while. Now, when I was at PACE back in May, that was the Plein Air Convention and Expo, one of the vendors was selling a whole lot of Holbein stuff. Everything was half price. Couldn't resist. And I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to do this. Now, I had some water mixable oils from probably 25 years ago. Didn't think they were all that great, but as I understand it, the technology has improved. And I love Holbein. I mean, while I don't use, their watercolors a lot, I think they're good. It's a good quality brand. And the water-soluble Duo Aqua Oil is their water mixable oil line. Here's what I've been curious about. And as an illustrator, I did some oils. I love to paint on paper. You had to gesso or prime the paper. You couldn't just use plain paper. That's pretty common with illustrators. A lot of times they'll gesso illustration board. I love the tooth. And I would take watercolor paper, do thin coats of gesso so that it kind of raised that tooth. It still felt like paper when you painted on it. And got some great effects. I used a fast drying medium. That was my method, which was liquid. There are fast drying mediums for water soluble oil too. I was very familiar with oils. I loved using a transparent process of glazes. So in that process, while you could paint opaquely, the process was a lot like watercolor. So fast forward up to 2024, and I'm wondering what the state of this medium is now. Lots of professional artists who paint in oils use water mixable oil. So there's a lot more information with YouTube being out there. There's a lot more videos about it. And that, if you want to know the basics of what water mixable oil is and how to use it, there's a ton of that stuff out there, and you can look at that. Here's been the reason I've come back to this. I have always had a curiosity about how much of a watercolor, see, I'm tying it in here, a watercolor sensibility I could bring to oil painting. Now, it's no secret if you've painted in watercolor and oils, you know already that watercolor will make you a better oil painter, because there are just some things that you want to do transparently. You want the vibrancy and the luminosity of reflected light through the paper to come through. In a lot of cases, that's prettier or more beautiful than adding white. And painting in a light to dark method is something you can do with oils, just like you do with watercolor. Generally, oils is thought of as a dark to light medium, and it can be done that way. I just wanted to know if water-soluble oils could benefit from some watercolor sensibility. Now, watercolor is generally painted on either panels, solid panels, like gessoed wood panels, or canvas. That's traditional, right? A smaller, I think, probably portion of oil painters will paint on gessoed paper. However, looky what I have here. Harsh oil paper. And this sort of brought my whole idea, my whole curiosity about oils, the sensibility of the way you paint in watercolor. It kind of brought it full circle. because this is, I'm telling you, this is a paper. And they have built the priming right into the paper, so it doesn't need to be gessoed. And I love that because I love an absorbent, toothy surface. And immediately I thought, if water can be used to thin and mix oils, maybe it can be used to do watercolor type effects. Is that true? Well, we're going to test that theory today. I think already, I believe that it can to a degree. Now, let me just add these basics. Water-soluble oil is oil color. It is not watercolor. Once the water evaporates, it is an oil paint. It dries slow like oil paint does. It can use oil painting mediums. They have water-soluble mediums like linseed oil. As I mentioned, I have this fast-drying medium. This is a water mixable fast-drying medium. Here was the other question I had. First of all, I love being able to paint on paper. That kind of answered that, the way you would with watercolor. The second was, can water be used as a medium? Now, typically when water-soluble oils first hit the market, it was touted only as a cleanup medium, making cleanup easier. And this is where some controversy still exists today. It's not recommended by some artists. I see kind of both recommendations or both opinions, not to use water as a medium, only as a cleanup solution. But can water be used as a medium to thin your paints and paint with? Yes. The answer is a very definite yes. There are oil painters out there doing it. And when I was at Pace and first saw these, I was very gratified to pull out their brochure and read that it can be indeed used as a medium. Oh, by the way, an Arch is not the only oil paper out there. There's some other brands. So you can Google that and find out about it. But the final thing was adhesion. And if you're painting on a hard surface and your amount of water becomes great and your amount of pigment small, conventional wisdom is that your adhesion to the surface breaks down. When you add to that the absorbency of paper, that issue almost completely goes away. Completely goes away. The pigments sink into the paper, adhesion. I feel like the problems that might hold me back from using this in a washy method have gone away. Anyway, we are going to try that, and I have already done some tests. This was a little session I did, and that's just using it the normal way. This is oil paper. This is watercolor, by the way. I wanted to see how well watercolor worked on oil paper. And it does work to an extent. It dries to sort of a faded consistency. It's not as brilliant when it dries, and it lifts off much easier than paper. But yeah, you can paint on that. The idea was, can you use watercolor as an underpainting? Don't know if that's useful, but you know me, I'm always experimenting. Anyway, this is all water mixable oil. And this was a test I did just to see how close I could get to a watercolor effect. This is traditional oil painting with mostly opaque paint. But I absolutely love the tooth. Some oil painters don't like that. They like for paint to slide off the brush easily. I like something that grips and you gotta kind of work it into the tooth a little more vigorously. But I did try some sort of wet techniques, and I thought they worked well. Now, you may at this point be asking, why do that? Why not just use watercolor? Well, a few reasons. Number one, the opacity of oils when you get ready and need opacity. It's obvious. With watercolor, you don't have any opacity unless you want to throw gouache in there. But with oil, you can build the opacity in right as you go if you want to, or you can paint transparently. That was kind of exciting to me. The other reason I wanted to try this is the slow drying blendability of oils. You can do to a certain extent with gouache, but it doesn't blend the same way as oil. And the large open time. You have a lot longer to work with that blending ability. So those were the things I wanted to test and experiment with. I don't plan on making this an oil painting channel, so don't worry if you're like, oh, I came to you for watercolor. What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I'm an experimenter and that's what I do, but you might see this stuff pop up every now and then. All right, so here's my setup. Aside from the oil set, which I think this is a 12 color set, I won't use all these colors. I'll tell you which ones I end up using. And the oil paper, which I've already mounted to a drawing board, and I have it laying flat now because I'm going to try some of these wet techniques. This will be spontaneous painting. I don't have any idea what I'm going to paint. I also don't want to use my good watercolor brushes for this, so I bought a cheap set of oil painting brushes. This is a set of Transon brushes that had a good rating. I actually have a whole lot more here than I need. I'm going to paint exactly the same way as I would if I were doing a watercolor painting. Anyways, I'll pick out a few of these brushes to start with and get my palette set up and get ready to paint. And all I've got is a big old tub of water. What I have done is picked 6 colors, actually 5 colors in white. Now, admittedly, you're probably not going to be able to do as much wet media painting as you would with watercolor, but I want to just see. I want to see how far I can go. We're going to start by pre-wetting some of the paper. This is not as water absorbent as watercolor paper, and that's to be expected. Water sort of beads up on top, but it does eventually kind of soak in. I do not have any clue what I'm thinking of painting. We're just going to see what emerges like I usually do. Spontaneous painting has always been a great learning tool, because you don't have to sit there and figure out what you're going to paint. Just start splashing paint. I'm going to take this flat. This is a number 12 flat. And I've got Cad Red and Phthalo Green. Now, the Cad Red is there just to neutralize this Phthalo Green if I need to, which you almost always need to. And I'm treating this, again, like it's watercolor. Almost. It's a very opaque color, as you might expect. But look at that. Oh my goodness, look at that. Does that look Does that look like watercolor or what? I did not expect that. When I did tests before, I did not get that kind of wash. Oh my goodness. This is oil paint, folks. Now, I don't know how, I don't know anything, basically. I don't know how fast this paper dries. I know the oil paint won't dry particularly quick. But look at that. I mean, I've got this on a very, very slight angle, but look at that. Good grief. Was not expecting that. I've got, this was this was yellow ochre. This is cobalt blue. And then I've got this brown, which is like a benza something. I don't know. Brown. So look, you get a backwash and everything. Can you believe it? Let's just do one of my typical spire paintings. You know, little tree spires. Grab some more of that phthalo over here. It's still a bit intense, so I'm going to add some more Cad Red to it. That's better. It's a little earthier. Cannot believe it. Absolutely cannot believe it. I figured I could do some things like I did watercolor, but I didn't know I could do that. I mean, to me, it would be just a blast if I could show somebody this painting and say, can you believe I did that? Or here, guess what I did this in? And they'll go, well, watercolor, of course. I'm going to use a soft brush to mop up some of that. And I mean, you know, when you're ready to wash out your brush, just like you would with watercolor. You will get those opinions, though, that are just adamant that you don't use water as a medium. I think that was the thing that held me back, is feeling like I had to paint like an oil painter would typically paint. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It's just a different way to paint, you know, where I like to paint like this. But I was really surprised to find out that's changed a lot. I'm going to mix the brown and the phthalo. See if I can get a near black, which I do. Now, since this, and you can see a little bit of buckling, just like you get with watercolor paper. The other thing, I mentioned two advantages, it's like why paint like this? Why not just use watercolor? Another one, which I did run across a little bit in my tests, was lifting. On this paper, even, you can lift, and that adds a whole nother dimension. I'm trying to get a faint sort of a background here. I've added some cobalt blue. I did not want that phthalo quite so intense, but that's all right. This is just a test. All right, so one thing I might do is use some pickup paper towel techniques like I would in watercolor. Let's see if I can get some intentional backgrounds in here. Yep, easy. No problem. Just to provide some shapes there that are contrasty. And this is already a big difference. What I'm doing here is already kind of pointing out a big difference. I wouldn't be able to manipulate watercolor quite like this while it was wet. I'm able to kind of move some of these colors in ways that, number one, a regular watercolor would just kind of pick up and it would muddy around some more, I think. But I am painting very transparently, which is not always the way you paint with oils. A lot of oil painters tend to go right in heavy, opaque, which is fine. That's a typical and legit oil painting process. Experiment a little bit more with some wet lifting. The thing that's going to probably be the hardest for me to get used to is, unless I use a drying medium, is how long this takes to dry before I can do, glazes or another wash, anything like that. We might just see if we can make this a lake with a reflection. Since I got spires going both ways, I'll do some more wet lifting here. I hope you can see kind of what I was aiming for when I say bringing a watercolor sensibility to oil painting. How possible is it? It's very possible. And see, this right here, what I'm doing right here, is something I couldn't do as well with watercolor, and that is just a slight upward blend. All right, I'm going to get this on an easel. I'm going to try to let the water part dry. The oil will not dry right away, and then we'll go further with it. All right, this is not dry yet. The water is not dry yet, but I'm continuing to play. With watercolor, you would have been a lot more in danger of creating backruns and run-ons and little ugly things if you keep on working. But with oils, although it creeps right there, you can see the paper's still wet, so it is not as backwash prone, so there's that. So we're just going to keep experimenting here. So I have this Indiana Jones picture over there hanging on my wall. It was done by an illustrator who used oil, traditional oil, not water mixable. But all of his highlighting was done by lifting. That's what I'm doing right now. The traditional approach would have been to paint your solid shapes, your washes, everything, probably turpentine. As I recall, that's what he used. He and I talked for a bit. That's been like years ago. And then you just use mineral spirits and go in and you lift out these details like I'm doing with these tree trunks here and just using water. If you're a oil painter and you're used to the paint sliding off your brush easily, it won't do it on paper. It's something you'll have to adjust to. But it's okay for me anyway. I've got a muddier color in here than I really wanted to have, but that's just my unfamiliarity with mixing these colors. All right, so this paper is drying out. It's still a little damp in places. This is what you cannot do with watercolor, at least not the same way, but where, for instance, some of these brush strokes are a little streaky, you can soften them. So I'm just looking at this and saying, okay, what would I like to change or blend or do something different with? Now, a lot of this paint has sunk into the paper and grabbed, so it's not exactly like being on top of a canvas. you don't have the same amount of blendability, but as you built up layers you would have. But I still am getting a certain amount of softening effect. All right, well, I let this sit for about another day, and I'm coming in now and using oils to their strengths. What you see here is just a few final highlights on the tree trunks. You know, oils are great for doing that. A little opacity, add a little bit of warm yellow ochre color in there, and it's great. Patrons, I'll probably continue working on this and do a video where I'm thinking about adding sort of a wet in wet oil sky, maybe doing some other glazing to kind of liven up the colors in other places. So you can look for that in the future. Y'all tell me what you think of this. This is something you'd like to see more of? Never fear, this is always going to be a watercolor channel. But I love working with mediums that sort of kind of work with watercolor or in a watercolor way. Let me know in the comments, have any of you tried water mixable oils? What do you think of them? Have any of you painted on oil paper? And what do you think of that? All right, thanks everybody. I really appreciate you watching. Take care. Thanks patrons for your support. We'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.